billion series, The Rings of Power's first 2 episodes are now available on Amazon Prime, and I admit that I went into this expecting to hate every moment of it.
What did you say?
So imagine my delight to find out that it's actually just really boring.
What?
Basically, nothing happens over the first 2 hours of this show. If you were watching the vastly superior Fellowship of the Ring, at this point you'd be clutching your heart and hiding your tears as Gandalf had just fallen into the depths of Khazad-dûm with the Balrog. But here we are, just spending the first 2 episodes world building and introducing the characters. Yeah, fucking what, mate? Why would you spend 2 hours world building in a world that has already been built by superior films? You knobwit. $1 billion and you couldn't find a way to get this story moving faster. Cut out a bit of fat, for God's sake. There's almost as much filler here as a Naruto arc. Unless you're just looking for something pretty to put on your second screen, there isn't really going to be a lot here for you. The actors are serviceable, I guess. No one really stood out in stark contrast to the original films. The colors are bright, but it doesn't quite seem to have the same depth as the original film, which is ridiculous when you consider that the Fellowship cost a mere $93 million in comparison. Episode 1 begins with Galadriel, who apparently is the main character of the series, being bullied in Valinor before setting sail to Middle-earth to fight Morgoth, briefly being treated to a bit of fan service in a battle that exists to dunk on the galaxy brains who ask why they didn't just fly the rings to Mordor with the eagles, and with a few seconds of a silhouette of Sauron and the exposition of Galadriel's revenge quest before cutting back to the elves scaling a mountain to reach Icecrown Citadel. There's also a bit of cringe here about the Citadel being so evil that fire doesn't work for heat. The light works just fine though, and they don't extinguish or anything, so okay.
That doesn't make sense.
My God, what is that smell? Oh.
Apparently the fire from Sauron's hands still works just fine though, until apparently it doesn't. No time to think about that because they get attacked by a snow troll who throws a big ice ball at them. Probably should have just called it an ice troll, but okay. Now it might be nostalgia, but I still feel like the cave troll from the Fellowship looked much better. This one just looks plastic and fake. Galadriel runs off the sword and is spranged off it like a trampoline and ends up killing the beast, which just looks kind of goofy.
So long, Bowser!
And despite finding evidence of what they've been looking for all along, her troops decide to mutiny on her because they're not getting paid overtime, but really it's just because they are wimps who don't like the cold. We are then introduced to the Half-Foots, which are fine, I guess. Girl Frodo eats some berries, and they worry about the stars while a warg watches them. Didn't know that wargs were shy, but okay. Jumping over to the elves, we have...
Harold Elrond.
Wait, did they just say Harold Elrond?
Harold Elrond.
Okay, I know it says Herald, but it sounds like Harold to me, so I'm going to call him that from now on. The forest looks fine, it's very nice and vibrant, but I really don't like these short-haired elves. Galadriel shows some scary symbol to Harold Elrond, who is unimpressed in her silly girl ideas, forcing her to ask to speak to his manager. The manager, who is the king of the elves, decides that he is afraid that looking for the hidden evil might bring about the evil, so he decides to give some of his best warriors a golden parachute retirement in the Undying Lands.
That doesn't make sense.
But okay. Also, Harold talking down to Galadriel doesn't make a lot of sense either, since I think she's like 1,000 years older than him and also his mother-in-law or something, but I'll admit I'm not the biggest lore guy on this one. Jumping over to some original characters, do not steal. We are treated to the best analogy of how milking Tolkien's legacy is going to turn out for Amazon.
What was that? Squirted out of it.
And some spooky foreboding that darkness is returning to the lands of men who were once servants of Morgoth. We are then introduced to Celebrimbor, that's the dude that forges the Rings of Power, and again, he just looks like another lame short-haired elf. Rings of Power really should have taken a page out of Shadow of Mordor's book here, where he actually looks really impressive and powerful.
They sculpt the rock with the respect of one who cares for an aged parent. I've long wanted to see them work.
Bringing us to the strangest part of the episode, where the sky parts to welcome Galadriel to the Undying Lands, but with her brother's revenge quest still firmly in her mind, she decides to jump off the boat and swim across the entire fucking ocean to get back to land. Seriously, what was she thinking here? It would just be a couple 100-mile light paddle across the Sundered Sea.
Not a great plan.
We get a nice little shot of a family of Ents, and they've even got a little baby Groot stump there. The characters look up and watch the sky as a meteor crosses their path as Tyrael has given up his wings and is falling into New Tristram.
We were meant for more than this. To protect the innocent. But if our precious laws bind you all to inaction, then I will no longer stand as your brother. Thus I fell.
sorry, I mean to say that Gandalf probably, who won't say anything for the whole season, is discovered by Girl Frodo in the first episode fades to black. And now at this point I was very bored, but I was willing to accept that the first episode is usually pretty slow, but at least they released it together with the second one so I don't have to wait a week to see if it picks up. Spoiler alert, it didn't.
What a twist!
The second episode shows us the intro finally, which fortunately isn't as bad as people said it would be, but it's still no Game of Thrones, which is going to be the main competitor and comparison to the majority of normies who will be watching. For the second time in as many episodes, we are introduced to fire that isn't hot.
It's not hot. Fine.
Huh, maybe they really are trying to be Game of Thrones. They better break out some tits fast if they want people to pay attention. There is a bit of a display of Gandalf's power, which is an obvious reference to the better movies. Harold, Elrond, and Celebrimbor want to build a new forge to make the rings, but they just don't have what it takes. So they head over to see the best friend of all the elves, the dwarves, who probably tell the dagger ears to stuff a dagger up their asses. And you know what? This is my favorite part. Khazad-dûm looks pretty sweet, the CGI isn't half bad, and my only real issue is that Elrond looks just about a head taller than the dwarves. He should really be much taller here, I think. Durin is the only person in the show that seems to be giving it their all, as he and Elrond decide to see who is the best pounder in the game. Unfortunately, the silly elfman doesn't have what it takes, and it is revealed that the reason for the dwarf hostility is that Elrond hasn't called in the last 20 years and missed the dwarf's wedding. However, they quickly get over this by enjoying a nice dinner together.
All right, noted. That's just straight up beautiful, by the way.
Meanwhile, Galadriel is on day 2 of her swimming meet, regretting her decisions entirely, but miraculously comes across a shipwreck that has been attacked by a giant sea serpent worm. We get to see some more original characters before they all get eaten by the hungry caterpillar. Worm. We get a bit of a brief cameo of Mount Doom before they were famous, but unfortunately in the soon-to-be evil human lands, spooky tunnels and disappearing people are being investigated as the first orc in the season shows up, if you don't count the first 3 minutes glossing over the first age at the start. There is basically no tension in the scene, and they quickly dispatch him and they take his head as a trophy. There is a bit of a cute scene where probably Gandalf is talking to some bugs and uses them to explain his mission, with a bit of foreshadowing from a spooky Sauron sword. In the final scenes, Galadriel and her new boyfriend are rescued from the ocean, and the dwarfs show off a literal mystery box which has something shiny in it that'll surely solve all the elves' problems.
What's in the box? What's in the fucking box?
I mean, it's got to be mithril, right? Like, what else could it be? And we fade to black. And that's it. That's everything you'll get over 2 hours. It's not as bad as it is just slow and boring, and if you strip away all the departure from the established lore and just take it as a generic fantasy show, then I guess it's fine with some potential to get better next week. But everything that happens just far needed to be chopped down to like about 30 minutes of content, or at least the first episode at the absolute maximum, so we could have got some real tension for the second episode. It's not the disaster that I was expecting, but it's barely memorable. I doubt anyone that actually watches it will even remember what happened to it if you ask them in a week or two, and it only cost $1 billion, I guess. Still, it could be worse.